Hi guys. So the second part of chapter 10 in terms of the nature of values. Um, as you already said in the beginning, values are deeply ingrained in our personality. They are part of who we are. They define uh, who or what we will do, what we won't do, and they're formed by many influences during our childhood, guys, or during our lifespan, essentially. But our parents influence our values very strongly. Our society influences our values. Um, we ask questions about a society's values. An example is why is crime so violent in South Africa and in other countries which also have very high crime rates? They're not associated with the same level of violence. So, is violence an acceptable value within a society? And values influence, as we already said, they influence our attitudes, so what we believe about life, and then they influence our motivations, guys, because value will either motivate you towards or away from something. If something is not acceptable to you, you won't do it because of your core values. And your career choice is also influenced by your values at the end of the day. But let's not forget that societal influences and practical things also impact greatly on our choices. So, and then in terms of an organization, values are influenced by the organizational social system. What the managers do influences the values, not just what the organizational stated values are. Okay, so there's a guy called Edward Springer who developed a instrument to measure our value system. And he asked the question, how do these values influence our behavioral choices? And okay, one of the criticisms Springer and other value theorists is that they mainly examine positive values, and the reality is we also have negative values. But okay, Springer said there are basically six value orientations. A theoretical person is a person who values knowledge, so it would a person who chooses to become an academic or something like that. An economic person is driven by the utility motive, so they want to see the outcomes of their behavior. So they like practical things, things that they can touch at the end of the day. Social person, giving and receiving love, guys. It's about people who um, would do well in NGOs and organizations that serve the community. So they are people that value serving others and giving back to others. Power, persons who are driven by the need to be in power and in control of other people. So managers tend to be high on power values. Religious persons have spiritual foundations. In other words, they look for the spiritual meaning in everything and how spiritual beings drive our behaviors or responsible for what happens to us, etc. And then aesthetic persons give meaning to life through creating beautiful things. So um, they people who are artistic or enjoy designing things, etc. You can have more than one value orientation. You tend to have a dominant value orientation. Think about what is important to you, which one of these values would describe you most, and perhaps which is your backup value at the end of the day. And that would by a large extent determine the type of job that you will go to and your study direction in many regards at the end of the day. There's also a guy called Geert Hofstede, but Geert Hofstede studied national culture. The book only deals with three of the dimensions, but I've put up all six dimensions over here. Power distance, collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. I'm going to go over the three that are in the book specifically, and then I'll come back to the other three. Power distance. In societies where power distance is tolerated, or high degrees of power distance is tolerated, then management and the political leaders of the society are seen as the elite, lots of privileges, and we aspire to be like those. In low power distance societies, everyone is regarded as equal. You still have managers and political leaders, but they're not seen as having more rights than everyday citizens. Salaries tend to be more similar to one another. People are treated as equals. If you think of South Africa with our Blue Light Brigade and people who earn lots of money and management that is quite um, far removed from the general worker population, we're probably a fairly high power distance society, and we aspire to be in those power positions. Individualism versus collectivism is an interesting one. Individualistic societies are very much people work because of contractual agreements. Uh, the uh, management is there to help the individual, but people essentially live their own lives. It's about achievement. Um, People function independently. They don't know their neighbors, and uh, the job has more priority over human relations. So it's all about me and myself and performing and being successful. In collectivistic societies, people are more bound by moral obligations. They believe in community. They extended family is important. Work is there just to provide resources for the family, and human relations have a priority. If you think of South Africa, perhaps we have both individualistic and collectivistic elements. If you think of Ubuntu, and traditional African culture is very collectivistic. My brother's children are my children, whereas European culture is more individualistic. But perhaps there's a move towards more individualistic culture. Masculinity versus femininity, forget about men versus women here. It's about masculine uh, values are testosterone driven. Um, it's about competition, performance, being on top. Uh, the People want to be better than others. People want to show off their wealth, and managers are forceful. Conflict is very much out there and dealt with as such, whereas feminine societies are much more nurturing and caring, and based on compromise and looking after people. So it's not about gender differences. It's here about a masculine society is much more achievement orientated. America is a highly masculine society, so it's about status and about achievement, where perhaps Africa, in some regards, is more feminine, caring relationships, maintaining. If we think of South Africa, we've got all these grants, etc., that we give to people. And it's about caring for our population. So, but again, it's a debate between the two. The three which aren't specifically dealt with in the textbook, but which I want to deal with here, uncertainty avoidance, is the degree to which a society has rules and regulations. A high uncertainty society, or a society that is high in uncertainty avoidance, has lots of rules and regulations. Society is strongly controlled. People know what's expected of them. Whereas in low uncertainty avoidance, it's much more fluid and much more less controlled societies. Now, South Africa is a difficult question. We've got lots of laws and regulations which really imply that we're very high on uncertainty avoidance, but we're not so good at adhering to them. So perhaps we somewhere in between the two. Long-term versus short-term orientation is a long-term orientation society is a society that focuses on tradition. They focus on the past and how it impacts on the present, where short-term orientation society are very much about the here and now and about pragmatics. Long term, the key distinction between the two, you can perhaps ask, is about the level of savings within a society. So, how much money do people put away, invest for the future, etc., and how much do we value tradition in a particular society? Again, South Africa, perhaps somewhere in the middle of the two, but you can decide for yourself. And then, indulgence versus restraint is one that Hofstede added later. Indulgent societies are pretty much societies in which people can experiment, do pretty much what they like. There's not these strong moral inhibitions, etc. If we think of indulgent society, I think of the Netherlands. You can smoke marijuana in a cafe. Um, uh, they're fairly sexually liberated, etc. People experiment a lot. There's not this key frowning upon it, versus restrained society has lots of moral restraints and a lot of limitations on the society, and perhaps African society is quite restrained in terms of the values, etc. We need to ask ourselves. Uganda, that I think of, it's a very religious country. Many things are frowned upon. For example, homosexuality is illegal in Uganda. The church plays a very strong role, influences life very strongly. So it's quite a restrained society. Okay, guys, in terms of organizational values, we look at person job fit and person organizational fit. Guys, it's about how your values fit in with the organizational context. Okay, so if you look at your values, if you're an outgoing, um, uh, vivacious, fairly loud person, and you choose something like accounting or bookkeeping, etc., it might not be a good person job fit at the end of the day, because they're too accounting is quite an introverted, quiet profession, although there are exceptions. But personal organizational fit, guys, I always use the example of myself. I'm a trainer. I hopefully can do the job fairly well, and I fit quite well within the university context where I have quite a bit of freedom, etc. Whereas within the um, let's say the bank context, where you have to work from 8 to 5, you have to wear a shirt and tie. It's very contained, etc. I probably would not fit very well within the organization. Okay, then in terms of organization, I mentioned earlier when we looked at values, organizations specify their own values, so they'll have value statements. And what is important is that the organization links individual behavior and organizational behavior to those values, and structures their goals around them. So it states what the organization can do. And you can also assess the values of an organization. Organization that I work for did a organizational cultural audit the other day, where they asked a question about what your personal values are, what are the organization's values, and how do these weigh up against one another at the end of the day. Guys, ethics is quite a difficult question. What's right, what's wrong? What's to you, what's right might be wrong to me. Ethics tend to be quite personal. They're based on morality. Morality is often religiously based, but guys, there also are key societal indicators of what is wrong and right within a particular society. And the key benefits of creating an ethical organization, in other words, an organization that asks questions about its behaviors, whether they can be morally and ethically justified at the end of the day, what are the consequences of their behavior, etc. So, how do we create an ethical organization? We've already spoken about a value statement, but a code of conduct. What is acceptable, what is not acceptable within the organization, putting an ethics committee in place to judge your actions. So, in other words, to ask questions about, is this ethically justifiable what we are doing, and having protection for whistleblowers, so people who provide information about people or parts of the organization that violate the ethical standards of the organization. In terms of industrial and organizational psychologists, there's a professional code of ethics that guide our practice, that tell us certain things that we can do and can't do. For example, guys, even though you may be a qualified industrial psychologist, it doesn't mean you can do anything in industrial psychology. One of the requirements is that you have to have been trained within that area of practice. Okay, guys. Uh, Work as a central value. One of the key things within South African society is our productivity. And guys, how important is work to individuals? So the questions that arise here is work versus leisure. How do we weigh up the two against one another? Um, how does society value work and value productivity? There are also differences between generations, guys. Older generations tended to be more loyal to organizations, more loyal to the job, whereas the current millennials, etc., are very much about um, you. If you want loyalty, buy a dog, but essentially you pay for my loyalty, and I'll give you as much loyalty as I get in return from you. Uh, it's a very old study, this, but values amongst high school children in South Africa were using their ability, personal development, and achievement, which is quite interesting. So people value the opportunities to be able to use their ability. When you think of Maslow within chapter 8 of self-actualization, so becoming self-actualized, which also goes with ego needs and personal development, and then achievement, so those higher level values or that Maslow speaks about, or motivators that Maslow speaks about, are also core values in South Africa. What are the predictions for managers? Guys, you need to understand and predict individual behavior based on values. So if you understand your people's values, and you need to understand your own values as well, guys. And based on these, you can then predict people's behavior within an organization, and you can also shape people's values and behavior by how you conduct yourself. So it's important to understand and manage cultural values and not expect everyone to have the same values as you, have the same understanding, have the same as you at the end of the day. Okay, guys, so the key thing here about values and attitudes is that they influence our behavior. Our values are at the core, whereas our attitudes essentially um, emanate from our values, and then our behavior is based on both our attitudes and values at the end of the day. And these impact on our work as an employee, but they also impact on the organization at the end of the day. Thank you.